What happens when America's sweetest comedian meets one of television's most provocative hosts? A seemingly innocent question about family values turns into the most explosive late-night moment of the year. Tonight, we're diving deep into the shocking confrontation that had Leanne Morgan walking off set, Andy Cohen scrambling for damage control, and the entire entertainment world buzzing about what really went down during that unforgettable interview. The stage was set for what should have been a typical promotional appearance. Leanne Morgan, the Tennessee-born comedian known for her relatable stories about motherhood and small-town life, was there to discuss her latest comedy special. Andy Cohen, ever the skilled interviewer, had his usual mix of light-hearted banter and slightly edgy questions designed to create those viral moments that keep viewers coming back. The interview began as expected. Andy welcomed Leanne with charm, praising her success and asking about her journey from small-town mom to comedy sensation. Leanne responded warmly, sharing amusing anecdotes about performing in local venues and juggling family life with her tour schedule. Then Andy leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Your comedy really centers around traditional family values and small-town life," he said. "Do you ever worry that your material might seem a bit outdated to younger audiences who are dealing with very different realities?" Leanne's smile faltered slightly, but she kept her composure. "I don't think love, family, and community ever go out of style," she replied. "My stories might come from a small-town perspective, but the emotions behind them are universal." Andy nodded, but pressed further. "Don't you think there's a responsibility, especially as someone with a growing platform, to acknowledge that not everyone fits into that traditional family structure you celebrate so often? Some might say your comedy inadvertently excludes people living different kinds of lives." The temperature in the studio shifted. Leanne straightened in her chair, her folksy demeanor showing strain. "Andy, I'm not trying to exclude anyone," she said firmly. "I tell stories about my life, my family, my experiences. That's what comedians do. I'm not making political statements or telling anyone how to live." Andy persisted. "But when you consistently present one type of family as the source of all your humor and joy, doesn't that imply it's the right way? Especially when you've made comments in the past about traditional values being under attack?" Leanne's eyes flashed. "I never said traditional values are under attack," she snapped. "I said they're important to me and my family. There's a difference between sharing your own values and attacking other people's choices." The audience fell silent. Andy, sensing tension but unwilling to back off, continued. "Let's be honest, Leanne. You've built your brand around being the wholesome mom from Tennessee. At what point do we acknowledge that traditional often means exclusive? That's when everything changed." "Andy, I need you to stop right there," Leanne said sharply. The warmth was gone from her voice. "You're twisting everything I've ever said into something it's not. I won't sit here and let you paint me as judgmental when you clearly haven't listened to a single thing I've said." Andy blinked, surprised. "Leanne, I'm not twisting anything. I'm asking legitimate questions about the impact of your messaging." "Messaging," Leanne repeated, incredulous. "See, that's where you're wrong, Andy. I don't have messaging. I have stories. I have experiences. I have a life that I share with people who connect with it. I'm not running for office. I'm telling jokes about my kids leaving socks on the floor and my husband forgetting the trash." The studio was dead silent. Andy's crew didn't dare move, but Andy wasn't done. "Those jokes come with context, Leanne. When you talk about traditional families, you're making a statement whether you intend to or not. Some people feel excluded by that." Leanne gave a tight laugh. "You know what really excludes people, Andy? Telling them their experiences don't matter because they don't fit someone else's idea of what's acceptable. You know what excludes people? When a talk show host decides that my stories about loving my family somehow mean I hate someone else's." "That's not what I'm saying," Andy protested. "Then what are you saying?" Leanne shot back. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're saying that because I love my traditional marriage and talk about it, I'm making other people feel bad about their non-traditional relationships. That because I think traditional values have worth, I must think others don't. That's not logic, Andy. That's just looking for a fight. Andy tried to regain control. I think you're misunderstanding the broader conversation here. There's a difference between celebrating your own life and presenting it as the ideal that everyone should follow. Leanne leaned forward, eyes steady. And there's a difference between asking questions and picking a fight for ratings. The tension was electric, so thick you could almost hear the cameras hum. What happened next would become one of late-night television's most talked-about moments. Should aspire to. And when exactly did I do that? Leanne demanded. Show me one time, Andy. Just one time where I said everyone should live like me. Show me one joke, one story, one comment, where I told anyone else how to run their life, their family, or their relationships. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Andy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly realizing he couldn't provide the example Leanne was demanding, but unwilling to back down. It's not always about explicit statements, Leanne. Sometimes it's about the overall narrative you're creating. The overall narrative I'm creating? Leanne repeated slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Andy, let me tell you something about narratives. For years, I performed at tiny venues where nobody knew my name. I told stories about feeling inadequate as a mother, about struggling to keep my marriage together, about feeling like I was failing at everything that was supposed to come naturally to women like me. I made people laugh by sharing my insecurities, my mistakes, and my very obvious imperfections. Her voice was growing stronger, more passionate with every word. I never once claimed to be perfect, or to have all the answers, or to be living some ideal life that everyone should copy. I shared my real experiences, my real struggles, and my real joys with people who saw themselves in those stories. And now you're telling me that somehow that's harmful. That my willingness to be vulnerable about my own life is creating some kind of toxic narrative? Andy, realizing he was losing ground fast, tried a different approach. But surely you understand that when someone with your platform celebrates certain lifestyle choices, it can feel like an endorsement of those choices over others. Leanne stared at him for a long moment, her expression shifting from anger to something almost like pity. Andy, do you hear yourself right now? You're essentially telling me that I'm not allowed to love my own life out loud because it might make other people feel bad about theirs. Do you realize how backwards that is? I'm not saying you can't love your life, Andy replied, his voice lacking its usual conviction. I'm saying there's a way to do it that doesn't marginalize other people's experiences. Marginalize? Leanne's voice cracked with disbelief. Andy, I talk about burning dinner, forgetting school events, and having awkward conversations with my teenagers. I make jokes about my marriage being held together by duct tape and prayer. How is any of that marginalizing anyone? How is being honest about my own struggles somehow putting other people down? The cameras kept rolling as the tension in the studio reached a fever pitch. Andy's usual smooth style had completely abandoned him. He seemed genuinely rattled by Leanne's passionate defense. Look, Leanne, I think we're talking past each other here, he said, attempting to regain control. All I'm trying to say is that in today's climate, we all have to be more conscious about how our words affect different communities. Different communities? Leanne repeated, shaking her head. Andy, I perform for truck drivers and teachers, nurses and mechanics, stay-at-home moms and working dads. I perform for people who are struggling to pay their bills and keep their families together. Those are my communities. Those are the people who come to my shows because they see their own lives reflected in my stories. Her tone dropped to a dangerous calm. And now you're telling me that I'm the one attacking your values? Andy, you've spent the last 15 minutes dismantling everything I stand for while pretending to ask innocent questions. You've questioned my integrity, my impact, and my right to share my own experiences without apologizing for them." She stood abruptly, the movement so sudden that several crew members instinctively stepped forward. The microphone pack clipped to her jacket caught the studio lights as she turned to face Andy directly. "You know what the real problem is here, Andy? It's not that I celebrate traditional values. It's not that I tell stories about small-town life. The real problem is that you've surrounded yourself with so many people who think exactly like you do, that you've forgotten there's a whole world out there that doesn't revolve around your perspective." Andy remained seated, his confidence visibly shaken. "Leanne, please sit down. Let's talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" Leanne laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "Andy, there's nothing rational about what just happened here. You invited me on your show to talk about my comedy special, and instead, you decided to put me on trial for the crime of being happy with my life choices." The studio audience shifted uneasily in their seats. This was not the kind of entertainment they had expected. "I was asking legitimate questions about the cultural impact of your work," Andy insisted, but his voice was hollow. "No, you weren't," Leanne shot back. "You were fishing for a controversial moment you could use to generate buzz for your show. You wanted me to say something you could twist into a headline. You weren't looking for conversation, Andy. You were looking for content." Andy opened his mouth to respond, but something in Leanne's expression stopped him cold. "Do you want to know what's really sad about this?" Leanne continued, her voice rising with emotion. "I came here excited to share my work with your audience. I thought this would be a fun conversation about comedy and family and finding joy in everyday life. Instead, you turned it into an interrogation about whether my happiness is somehow problematic." She began unhooking her microphone, her movements deliberate and final. "You know, Andy, I've spent my entire career trying to make people laugh about the challenges of real life. I've shared my failures, my insecurities, my struggles, and yes, my successes too. I've been honest about what works for me and my family while never claiming it has to work for everyone else." She held the microphone pack in her hand like a prop in the most important performance of her life. "But apparently, in your world, that kind of honesty is dangerous. Apparently, being genuinely happy with traditional choices is somehow threatening to people who made different ones. Apparently, celebrating your own life is only acceptable if you apologize for it first." Andy finally stood, realizing the situation was spiraling. "Leanne, I think you're overreacting. These are important conversations our society needs to have." "Our society?" Leanne's eyebrows shot up. "Andy, you don't speak for our society. You speak for your bubble, your audience, your worldview. And that's fine, but don't pretend it's universal." She stepped closer to his desk, the cameras following her every move. "Here's what I think our society actually needs. More people willing to be genuinely happy without apologizing for it. More people who can celebrate their own choices without tearing down others. More people who understand that there's room in this world for all kinds of families, all kinds of values, and all kinds of stories." Her voice built to a crescendo that silenced the entire room. "But most of all, we need fewer people who think their job is to police other people's happiness and make them feel guilty for living lives that don't match some predetermined template of what's acceptable." She placed the microphone on Andy's desk, and the sound of it hitting the wood echoed through the studio. Leanne set the microphone pack on Andy's desk with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any shout could have. "I came here to talk about making people laugh," she said. "Andy, instead, you've reminded me why so many people feel like they can't be honest about their own lives anymore. You've reminded me why so many feel they have to hide who they really are and what they really believe just to avoid being attacked by people who claim to champion tolerance." The cameras captured every word, every expression, every moment of what was clearly becoming television history. Andy stood frozen behind his desk, seemingly unable to process what was happening. "So, thank you for that reminder," Leanne continued, her voice now carrying a sadness that cut through the anger. "Thank you for showing me exactly why my comedy matters so much to the people who come to my shows. They're hungry for someone who will tell them it's okay to love their lives, even if those lives don't fit someone else's idea of what's progressive or enlightened." She turned toward the exit, then stopped and looked back at Andy one final time. "You know what, Andy? I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I hope you find a way to be happy with your own choices without needing to tear down other people's choices, because that's what genuine tolerance actually looks like." And with that, Leanne Morgan walked toward the studio exit, leaving behind the most explosive late-night television moment anyone could remember. As she reached the door, Andy's voice cut through the stunned silence, a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. "Leanne, wait. You're walking away from an important conversation here." She stopped, her hand on the door handle, and slowly turned around. The expression on her face showed genuine disappointment mixed with quiet resolve. "An important conversation?" she repeated, walking back toward the center of the studio with measured steps. "Andy, you don't want a conversation. You want a confession. You want me to admit that my happiness somehow makes other people unhappy. You want me to apologize for loving my life." The studio audience watched in absolute fascination as she positioned herself directly in front of Andy's desk. No longer the guest being interviewed, but the person in control of the entire room. "Let me tell you what an important conversation would actually sound like," Leanne said, her voice carrying to every corner of the studio. "An important conversation would be about why we've reached a point in our culture where someone can't share their joy without being accused of causing someone else's pain. An important conversation would be about why authenticity has become so threatening that we'd rather have people lie about their experiences than risk making anyone uncomfortable." Andy tried to interject, but Leanne's momentum was unstoppable. An important conversation would acknowledge that there are millions of people in this country who feel like they can't talk about their faith, their families, or their values without being labeled as bigots or dinosaurs or threats to progress. People who feel like they have to apologize for finding fulfillment in roles that don't fit the current cultural narrative. She gestured toward the audience, many of whom were nodding along with her words. These are people who work hard, love their families, contribute to their communities, and try to live good lives according to their own understanding of what that means. And instead of celebrating that diversity of experience, we've created a culture where certain types of people feel like they have to hide who they are, just to avoid being attacked. Andy's face had gone completely pale. "Leanne, that's not what I was trying to do." "Then what were you trying to do, Andy?" she demanded. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you were trying to shame me for being proud of my choices. It looks like you were trying to make me feel guilty for sharing stories that resonate with people who live lives similar to mine." The confrontation had reached a level of intensity that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable, but nobody could look away. "You talk about inclusion and tolerance," Leanne continued, "but your version of inclusion apparently doesn't include people like me. Your version of tolerance apparently doesn't tolerate people who find meaning and purpose in traditional ways of living." Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. "Do you know how many women have come up to me after my shows and thanked me for making them feel like it was okay to be proud of being a mother? Do you know how many couples have told me that my jokes about marriage helped them remember why they fell in love with each other in the first place?" She wiped at her eyes, not caring that the cameras were capturing her vulnerability. These are people who had started to feel like their lives didn't matter, like their choices were somehow less valid than other people's choices, like their happiness was something to be ashamed of. And my comedy helped them remember that there's nothing wrong with loving the life you've built, even if it's not the life that gets celebrated in magazines or on social media. Andy stood there speechless, clearly unprepared for this level of raw honesty and passion. So, when you sit here and question the impact of my work, when you suggest that my celebration of traditional values is somehow harmful, you're not just attacking me, Andy. You're attacking every person who has ever found comfort or joy or validation in my stories. You're telling them that their experiences don't matter as much as other people's experiences. Leanne took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. I refuse to apologize for that. I refuse to apologize for making people laugh about the beautiful, messy, imperfect reality of family life. I refuse to apologize for celebrating love and commitment and the choice to put your family first. And I absolutely refuse to apologize for being happy. She turned back to Andy one final time. You want to have important conversations, Andy? Start by having an honest conversation with yourself about why someone else's happiness threatens you so much. Because that says a lot more about you than it does about me. And with those words, Leanne Morgan walked out of that studio, leaving Andy Cohen standing speechless behind his desk, his audience sitting in stunned silence, and his production team scrambling to figure out how to end the most explosive interview in late-night television history. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Andy's shocked expression as he struggled to find words that never came. When the show finally went to a commercial break, everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented, a moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for months to come. What was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into a cultural lightning rod, exposing the deep divisions in how Americans view family values and the right to celebrate your own choices without apology. Chers auditeurs,